Masha was nervous as she slid under the covers, but confident that she could do this. Her castle had grown. Her defenses were set. She was ready to do battle. Dex had tried to sit with her, Dunstan too, but she had told them to go get some sleep. Dex, her knight in shining armor, was looking a little ragged these days. He needed sleep, and she felt bad that he had been the one keeping up with her. She knew he needed rest, and hopefully he would get it tonight. She was going to stop this intruder, or die trying. Dunstan, well, she hated to say it, but he was more like a jester, but not in a bad way. Dunstan lifted her spirit when she needed it most. He too had been looking a little odd these days, like he knew something, but couldn't quite tell you what it was. Both of them were looking bad, and Masha wanted to help them. Tonight was the night. It was do or die, and Masha grinned as she tried to quiet her mind. Chandra had no idea what was waiting for her, and that was Masha's advantage. Chandra may have thought that she was going to toy with Jean Grey, but she was about to step into Mojo World. Let the games begin, Masha thought, with a yawn as she drifted off. Rebecca kept an eye on the little girl as she got herself ready to sleep. There was something different about her, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She seemed resolved in a way that Rebecca couldn't have said she would have been able to mimic. Rebecca would have been scared out of her mind by the idea of someone breaking into her head after lights out, but Masha seemed no more worried than she would have if someone was borrowing sugar. "She'll be fine," someone said, and she was unsurprised to find Gerald looking at her from the next bed over. "Creepy crawly," she growled. "How do you even know what I'm thinking about?" "Because it's what I'm thinking about too. I imagine it's what all of us are thinking about tonight." Rebecca lay back, pulling the covers up to her chin. She was worried, but she didn't know why. She had just met this little girl. She had just met all of them, but she felt close to them in a way that she couldn't explain. She had never heard of the camaraderie sometimes discovered by individuals when they're incarcerated together, or the sudden bonds felt by soldiers when they undergo training, but it would have made a lot of sense. They were prisoners here, soldiers in the same way, and the bonds they had made were as strong as they were sudden. "I wish there was something we could do for her," she said into the cuffs of her sheets. "Pray for her, I guess," Gerald said, and Rebecca laughed. She couldn't help it. Prayer was the last thing she had expected from Gerald. "I didn't know you were so religious." "I'm not, but in this case I don't see any harm in it. This is something she has to do on her own, it seems. And I seem to recall from the short amount of time that I was in Bible school that God loves an underdog." Rebecca thought of David and Joshua and Daniel and decided that he might have a point. She sent a little prayer before going to bed and just hoped that God could hear her in a place like this. Chandra closed her eyes as she lay in her bed inside the dorm and opened them onto a medieval time. "What the hell?" she breathed, standing outside the walls of an imposing castle. As she approached, a trumpet sounded from somewhere inside, and a guy in Renaissance fair gear came up to the top and unrolled a scroll. "By decree of Lady Masha, rightful lord of this castle, all trespassers are hereby ordered to vacate post-haste or be dealt with severely." He rolled up the scroll again and disappeared, leaving Chandra to look at the faraway castle in wonder. This was very different than the landscape she usually found here. Normally it was so disjointed. Dreams about school, dreams about theme parks and play parks, or cartoonish dreams that were more than a little abstract. She could warp and corrupt these dreams, turning them from something fun into an absolute nightmare. But the landscape was rarely this cohesive. The little bitch had been expecting her somehow. Well, that was fine. Chandra didn't need her permission to mess things up. She extended her thought towards the wall, meaning to turn it into marshmallow, but the walls stayed intact, made of thick stone. Chandra furrowed her brow and sent a new thought towards them. She would turn them into glass and break them into pieces. She would smash the little bitch's wall into pieces then, and she would... The walls were still stone. Chandra gritted her teeth, but she wasn't out of tricks just yet. If this was how the little bitch wanted to play, then that's how they'd play. Chandra summoned an army of soldiers in the empty field before the castle. These were no tame fantasy knights either. Chandra had imagined some rough and rowdy mercenaries from the fantasy novels she used to read. These were real headcrackers, and she had no doubt that they would make short work of whatever the little bitch girl had mustered up. Instead of the drawbridge coming down, though, Chandra saw the walls fill with catapults and bowmen who rained down boulders and arrows on her men. No problem, Chandra thought, summoning up a bunch of horsemen and giants to get in close. The giants came in to bang on the walls, sending some of the archers falling, but when they started dumping oil on them, they stumbled away and started batting at their burning skin. Chandra was getting frustrated, so she summoned a bunch of men on bats to fly over the walls to finish them up. They were met by a bunch of Pegasus riders, and there amongst them was the little bitch girl. She was dressed like a warrior princess, stabbing the bat riders with her spear and sending them falling to the ground. She moved her Pegasus riders with expert skill, and Chandra summoned more of the bat riders to combat them. Chandra summoned dragon riders, manticores, and all sorts of terrible things, but the archers just shot them down. The catapults scattered others like bowling pins, and the warrior princess and her Pegasus riders did for the rest of them. Chandra realized that she wasn't being diverse enough, only focusing on one spot at a time, and she was growing frustrated with the girl's ability to put her aside. The dragon that rose from the forest was huge, smog incarnate from all those nerd movies her brother liked, and Chandra rode on its back like a flea on a dog. The bats and Pegasus scattered, but not the girl. Chandra made the dragon breathe fire at her, but she dodged nimbly aside and drove the spear against the underside of the dragon. The hot breath came on regardless, slagging the wall and sending the defenses tumbling onto the ground troops. Chandra didn't care. She didn't need them anymore. She had the girl right where she wanted her, and the combat between the two of them was just fine. The dragon swiped at the Pegasus, but the nimble creature easily avoided it as the little bitch looked for a hole in the dragon's armor. Good luck, Chandra thought. There were no holes in this dragon. She'd be hard-pressed to bring it down with just her little spear. When the dragon swerved in midair, Chandra thought she had her. The tail whipped around directly in the path of the flying horse, and it would have knocked the little bitch girl off if she hadn't jumped over it and landed just as easily on her horse again. The dragon sucked in breath to breathe fire, and as the gout raced out, the Pegasus banked out of the way, losing only a few burnt feathers for the maneuver. She went right back to jabbing at the dragon's underbelly, and Chandra had to admit that she was persistent. "Jab all you want, little bitch. His armor is impregnable. You'll never..." But when the dragon lurched suddenly, Chandra knew that she had overestimated the beast. It started to drop, blood oozing from the wound on its chest, and as it fell, Chandra summoned one of the bats for herself and jumped off. The girl had been waiting, it seemed, and as she came in, Chandra gave herself a sword and a shield to hold her off. The tip of the spear skipped off the shield, but as Chandra chopped at her with the heavy old sword, the girl was already gone. The two of them fought, colliding and breaking again and again, and when the girl took the bat Chandra was on through the membrane of its wing, Chandra managed to land it safely before trading her longsword for something a bit more comfortable. The rapier was similar to the ones that she had used in her fencing classes, maybe a little more ornate, and she stood glowering at the little girl on the winged horse. shouting her challenge up at her. "Coward! Come fight me on the ground like a real warrior!" To her surprise, the little bitch landed. She donned a shield, a small one that fit over her arm, and as she approached, she looked as stoic and ready as a 6-year-old in armor could. Was she taller? Chandra didn't know. She thought she was, but it was honestly hard to tell. The way she held that shield and spear made it look formidable too, and Chandra wondered if she knew how to use it. She had been cutting down her warriors with relative ease, but most of that was pretend. All of this was pretend to one degree or another. That was all these mental battles were when you came down to it. Who had the best mental acuity? Who had the most vibrant imagination? Or who could think their way around their opponent? Chandra, despite her age, had a very healthy imagination, and she had been cultivating it for as long as she could remember. This was what it was all about, mental combat to one degree or another, and she would give the little bitch girl her due, because she had made her fight for every inch today. The girl was strong, stronger still now that she was aware that someone was playing in her mind. But it didn't matter. Chandra had fought like this before against people whose imagination made this one look weak indeed, and she had always won. This contest would be no different. They squared off, the girl smirking as Chandra tossed her shield away and took her stance. "If you leave now, I promise I won't hurt you," the little bitch girl said. Chandra almost laughed, but instead she lunged forward, grinning as the girl barely got her shield in line to block the blow. She had her spear up like some kind of pint-sized Spartan warrior, and when she thrust, Chandra put it aside easily. Her retort was quick and precise, but the girl twisted away and thrust again. Chandra put it aside too, taking her time as she felt out the girl's skill. It didn't take long. The girl had clearly never used a weapon before in earnest. Her knowledge of fighting was from movies or video games, and she was clumsy with the spear, but not the shield. The shield was always in the way, blocking her shots when they came clanging in, but each block was slower. Her arms were clearly getting tired, and Chandra supposed that she should have done a few more mental jumping jacks. The kid had skill, but she was scraping the bottom of the barrel, and that was clear. When the first slice rode high on the shield and cut her arm, she cried out and tried to retreat. But there was no retreat from Chandra's blade. She slammed at her, smacking at the shield and sending it jittering this way and that. Finally, her arm fell too low, and Chandra put the tip right into her shoulder. It bounced, but only a little. The spear tried to come up, but Chandra backhanded it away contemptuously. The spear went flying, and Chandra put the point of the rapier into the girl's other shoulder and smiled as she cried out in pain. The flutter of wings and the cry of a horse was all the warning she got before the Pegasus tried to kick her in the face. It flew in front of its rider, hooves pawing at the air, but Chandra got tired of the game. She backed away a little, putting her hand behind her back as she got some distance between herself and the Pegasus. She had liked Pegasi since she was a kid. They had always been her favorite mythological creature, but this one was a bit too close for comfort. She pulled the handgun out from behind her back, the shape similar to the one her father had taught her to shoot, and put 3 rounds into the creature. One of them hit it square in the forehead and dropped it like a sack of grain. Then she stepped over it and leveled the gun at the bleeding girl. "You broke the rules," the girl said wetly, coughing up some blood as she stared into the gun's barrel with more bravery than she had any right to. "Sue me," Chandra said, debating whether she wanted to shoot the kid or stab her with the sword a bit more before she died. "I must say, I'd expected more from you. The way the teachers go on about you, I would have thought that you'd have been harder to kill. You know, however, that once I kill you, Your persona here, I mean. You'll pretty much be brain dead. You knew that, right? I guess, the girl whispered, still staring down the barrel of the gun. Well, aren't you a smarty? Let's see what all that smarts looks like, splattered on the ground. She almost shot the kid on accident when she smiled at her, not understanding what the bitch had to smile about. She had lost. She was going to die now. Chandra had won. What the hell did this little girl have to be happy about? That's why I cheated too, she said, and when Chandra squeezed the trigger, she fell over dead. But the world didn't immediately go dark. The medieval times thing persisted, and she glanced around in confusion. This wasn't right. Something was amiss. What had the little bitch said before she axed her? She had cheated. Cheated or not, this all should have collapsed when she died. So what exactly had she... The thing that hit her in the back sent the rapier and the gun flying in either direction. Chandra was thrown forward, falling across the dead girl as she tried to get control of her limbs. They didn't seem to want to obey her, jittering and convulsing as she lay in the dirt and blood. She turned her head as a shadow fell across her, trying to see who it was, and her eyes went wide. It was her. It was the bitch girl, and her hands were crackling with lightning. You cheated, she stammered, her jaws clacking as she tried to speak. Sue me, she retorted, mimicking Chandra's words perfectly. How? She asked, her hands grasping for the shield, but unable to grab it as her fingers clutched feebly. I simply let you see what you wanted to see. You wanted to see me on the battlefield, so that's what I gave you. You wanted to kill me, so that's what I gave you. I let you come all the way to the end, only to stumble at the finish line. Did you have fun, Chandra? Did you enjoy killing me? Chandra nodded, feeling some of her control come back. Good. It'll be a high note for you to go out on. Masha opened her hands and let the lightning arc into her rival. She was a wizard, a spell slinger, and she let the magic fly. Chandra had thought the girl was at the bottom of her imagination, but Masha had just been getting started. She shocked her enemy, putting enough energy into it to electrocute 100 death row inmates. Chandra bucked and smoked, her clothes catching fire and her skin beginning to melt. Her eyes burst in their sockets, her eardrums popped, and her mind unraveled. All her anger and hatred dribbled out of her like spit from an open mouth. Masha stood over her as she died, inside her own head, and she could find no pity for the girl. After all, it was Chandra or Masha, and even at 6, Masha knew it couldn't be her. When Chandra didn't get up for breakfast, no one much noticed. When she wasn't at her first class, the teacher had a minder go down to check on her. The minder returned a half hour later, whispering something to the teacher that made her gasp. Students, I'm afraid to report that Chandra will no longer be joining us. She was discovered this morning in a catatonic state. She's been taken to the infirmary, but it's unclear at this time whether she will ever come out of it. They will likely send her home so that she can live out whatever is left of her life with her parents. There are sometimes side effects of using mental powers. Too much strain on the brain can cause aneurysms, and worse, so be mindful of how much you use your special gifts. The class was a twitter with quiet talk, but Masha didn't join in. She had vanquished her first opponent and lost a part of her innocence along the way. She didn't feel bad. It was the way of the world, after all. Only the strong survived, and now Chandra knew who was the stronger. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.